Happy Friday, hockey fans, and welcome in to another edition of Daily Faceoff Live. We like to call these the Everything is Happening editions of the show because there is a lot going on. The show is brought to you by Bet365. Download the app today. Use the promo code NATION to get in on a huge range of markets, whatever the moment. It's never ordinary at Bet365. We're streaming live on the Daily Faceoff YouTube, where not only are we looking for your hashtag AskDFO inbox questions, but you can also get in on today's Dominion Lending's centered poll question, which we'll have more on in a second. But Frank Seravalli, a lot going on this morning and last night in the NHL.
Yeah, let's dive right into it because the New York Rangers are front and center today.
Yeah, they are. The news this morning, if you have not seen it, Arthur Staple was one of the first to report it out in New York. If it is not a trade for Trouba, Staple believes he will go on waivers later today. Frank, it feels like the Rangers doing a similar thing that they did to Barclay Goodrow earlier in the offseason, where he's blocking a trade because of his no trade clause, and the Rangers are just going to put him on waivers, let that team claim him, and go from there?
It's a possibility, yet the Rangers have been working pretty closely with Trouba and his camp over the last couple of days to try and find a suitable fix so that they don't have to go down that path. Look, this is a messy divorce in which what has been a really dramatic last 6 months or so in the Rangers' relationship with their captain. And look, you heard Peter Laviolette, their coach, talking this morning about how the team is in lockstep on this. I don't know that the players would necessarily agree, but at least Chris Drury and Peter Laviolette, the coach, are on the same page as far as a path forward. And it's really interesting to try and sit back and figure out which teams might be involved here. One team that has been reported this morning, the Columbus Blue Jackets from Aaron Portzline and others. Look, I think the list is much longer than that. This isn't simply going to be a salary cap dump for the Rangers. And then Larry Brooks reporting here within the last 10 to 15 minutes here from the New York Post that the Rangers have set their sights on trying to snare Brady Tkachuk from the Ottawa Senators, which would be a much larger transaction in which Trouba could be part of. There's a lot of moving parts to this. I've gone through the list and I've begun crossing off some teams that may not be part of it. Like one, I'll give you, for instance, one really logical choice you would think would be the Utah Hockey Club. They're without John Marino, Sean Durzi, and now Maverick Lamoureux, 3 right shot defensemen. You're thinking, okay, Trouba, they have the cap space. They certainly have the picks and ability to go after someone like Trouba. And yet it seems like Utah is not in the case. I could see the Nashville Predators being another one of those teams nibbling around the edges here as they've been looking for a top 4 defenseman. No indication yet firmly as to whether or not they're in the mix, but some of the other teams that have been mentioned, the Detroit Red Wings, Trouba is a Michigan native, and they were believed to be one of the teams that was involved with him last summer. Kevin Adams was just mentioning the Buffalo Sabres have not become a destination in the NHL for players to want to go to. I think that probably is potentially a hint at where things stand with them in the Trouba situation. But yes, make no mistake. We can say with certainty that one thing is clear. Jacob Trouba's time with the New York Rangers is coming to an end, and he will be on the move one way or the other. It's just a matter of, is it going to be by trade, or are they going to work around that no trade clause and simply place him on waivers where even he loses control of that situation because another team that might have been talking to New York or might not have expressed their interest that's lower down the totem pole could place a claim on waivers.
Trouba has one more year on his current deal with a cap hit of $8 million. And I think that does maybe work in the favor of would a random team really claim Jacob Trouba and sign themselves up for the rest of that contract?
Look, I think there's way more interest in Jacob Trouba than the general public or social media sphere would allow for in the hockey world. The tougher part is trying to figure out the cap space and how that all might work, taking that on full boat. Another team that had been mentioned was the San Jose Sharks, for instance. But, okay, let's say the Sharks end up taking on Trouba. Well, how do they then end up moving him? It's not, you wouldn't think a destination to have him park there and be there for the remainder of the deal. The Sharks don't have any retention spots left to be able to then flip him for half price. You'd have to get a third team involved, which could then retain half. And all of a sudden, because there's term on that deal, it becomes a much more expensive acquisition to try and pull off. So I think there's a million moving parts here, and a lot has been laid on the table for Jacob Trouba to consider some potential options. I think what's really clear, you don't have to go to this one specific place, but you can't stay here any longer.
Mm-hmm. So just again, as I kind of try to wrap my head around all of this as we break it all down, the idea of putting him on waivers, and you say again, there's interest in the player, that would not be necessarily to just wipe your hands of him and say we're clean. It would be more of a means to get him to a certain destination, maybe.
Correct. It's just a workaround of, hey, there's 15 teams on your no trade list. Well, if you're not going to accept a trade, we'll complete a trade with that team for future considerations. And then we'll put you on waivers and they'll be the team that then claims you. And there's absolutely nothing that you can do about it. There is precedent for this. This, as you mentioned, Barclay Goodrow, this happened recently. They tried to trade him, couldn't complete the deal. San Jose steps in and grabs him on waivers. And that's that. I don't think that that'd be the preferred choice for anyone. But look, this is the contract that Jacob Trouba and his agent negotiated. That full no move clause flexibility that or force that Jacob Trouba had in his deal that expired on July 1. So once that happened, the first 6 years of the deal were a full no move. He couldn't be placed on waivers without his permission. Now that that's expired, this is an avenue that the Rangers can pursue. It's perceived as cutthroat, but I think when you really kind of boil it down and consider all of this here, the fact that they've gone to him and laid out a list of potential options for him, and he's still resistant to that, sometimes teams have no choice, and this is the workaround that they have at their disposal to try and make some changes.
I smell a loophole that will be closed in the next CBA, or will at least be a sticking point. Like if it's happened twice, I can't imagine that PA's thrilled about this happening.
Yeah, but if, again, the other option was to get all 8 years of a full no move. You had it, and you had it for the first 6 years. That's expired, and now you've opened yourself up to it. This is the deal that you negotiated. So if you don't like it, as much as fans and other players might not like it, and as much as Trouba might not like being force-fed a new destination, then it was on him to take less money in exchange for a full no move.
Fair. Yeah, I see that side of it as well. Again, there was some big news last night in the NHL with the coaching change in Chicago. We're going to touch on that in a little bit, and our big segment today will feature Charlie Roumeliotis out in Chicago. But Frank, a couple more things to close off the Four Nations Faceoff conversation from yesterday, including the talk about next men up. I know yesterday on the DFO rundown, I think we touched on it here as well, the idea that maybe some players would be given a heads up that like, hey, you're the next guy if there are injuries. Is that the case? And maybe we can start with Team Canada.
So the funny thing about Team Canada is their list of potential players that are injury replacements is actually quite wide. They've cast a wide net here. And the thought process is, as I touched base with Doug Armstrong yesterday, is it's not a cop-out when he says this. The best players playing the best at that time will be the best choices for us. So basically what's happened now is we know that over the next 10 weeks, there are going to be injuries. I'd be absolutely shocked if all four of these teams don't have at least one change heading into the Four Nations face-off, given just that's how life in the NHL works. Now, that said, basically what we have is an audition period that's opening for Team Canada saying, you show us what you got. You're on our list, but be one of those players that can step up to the front of the line. Now, some of it will depend on position. If you're a defenseman, is it left or right shot that ends up with an injury? Or if it's, at the forward group, are you someone that they had planned on contributing to power play? Were you lower in the lineup? Were they looking for something a little bit more versatile and diversified in your skill set? All those caveats are going to apply, but let's look at three names that I believe that have come to the top of Team Canada's list. They include Mark Scheifele from the Winnipeg Jets, also Zach Hyman from the Edmonton Oilers, and on defense, I believe one of the very last players cut was Mackenzie Weegar from the Calgary Flames. Hyman, of course, last night, big, first game back, and you're looking at it almost, on hat trick watch last night, almost doubles his season-long goal total. Huge response from him from being cut from the Four Nations face-off team. If he continues at a clip like this, he is certainly going to be at the very top of the list for a lot of the reasons we mentioned. Hey, this guy was a surprise cut. Scheifele, to me, I think he's right on that edge of being an undeniable player for Team Canada to leave off of this team. He started really well, obviously well north of a point per game, among the league leaders so far this season. Some view him as one-dimensional. I view him as a horse, someone that can really contribute strongly to Team Canada. And then on the back end is Mackenzie Weegar. He's a guy that has a strong skill set in both ends of the ice. I think he defends better than he's given credit for. He's got good puck skills. I think better puck skills than someone like Travis Sanheim. Sanheim ends up making the team because of his ability to play right and left side, and definitely has a little bit more of a physical presence as well. So keep an eye on Weegar. And then as we transition to Team USA, three guys, I'm going to call them the Suns: Thompson, Robertson, and then on the back end, Sanderson. They're the three guys that kind of stand out to me as the last cuts from Team USA, that they're certainly going to be in the mix if there's injury. Jake Sanderson, up and down season for the Ottawa Senators. I think he's someone that is really right there knocking on the door and is certainly in line potentially for the 2026 Olympic team. He was trying to chase down guys like Noah Hannafin and Zach Werenski for a spot on this Team USA team. He's really close. Jason Robertson, 46 goal, 109 point scorer from a couple years back. To think that this guy was left off of it. Slow start to this year, can rebound for the Dallas Stars and may have some more opportunity with some of the injuries that they have. And Tage Thompson has been excellent for the Buffalo Sabres this year. So those are 6 guys that I believe kind of rise right to the top of the list as next men up.
So that's the serious stuff. And to steal a line from my friend Johnny Lazarus, now time for a fun one as we look at a little exercise you guys are doing over on the website about the B teams for Canada and USA. So let's start with Team Canada, Frank, and take a peek at the forward group. And it is really funny to look at this and be like, oh yeah, that's still like an all-star plus team that Canada could put together with just the players who were cut, with the Celebrinis and Bedards and a couple of guys who I think will actually factor into the Olympics next year. But this is a stacked roster.
Look at that one line there. 3 number 1 overall picks in a row: Lafreniere, Celebrini, and Bedard. It's, as much as you get excited about the potential youth on Team USA and some of the guys that we're going to talk about in a second, you look at this Canadian team and you go, man, still stacked and still also really difficult to play against. There have been some injuries among this group. Robert Thomas, Matt Barzal is currently out. And there have been some really slow starts that, had they not been, probably would have played their way in. What gets exciting, and if I'm not mistaken, it's our poll question of the day, as you take a look at Team Canada's B team and then the US B team, which one do you think has the better odds? Like, which one, if you put them head to head against each other, who would win? So this is a look at Team Canada's B team defense core. We just talked about Mackenzie Weegar, Evan Bouchard, 80+ point scorer, Thomas Chabot, really well-rounded on the defensive end. Chris Tanev eats pucks. And then the goaltending, if I were riding the hot hand from a goaltending perspective, these 3 goalies would be the guys that I'd have on this current Four Nations roster, not on the B team.
Yeah, that's exactly what I wanted to say. I like these goalies more than I like the 3 Canada ultimately went with. This blue line's still very solid. As Pat, you want to flash up Team USA here, and we'll work our way through here. Man, I mean, you got a 40-goal guy in Brock Besser, Clayton Keller, legit. Cole Caulfield off to a red-hot start, even down to that 4th line, just a couple of worker bees in Connor Garland and Matthew Nyes. And then you flip to the blue line and the goaltending for Team USA. Again, there is some serious upside here with Sanderson and Vlasic on the left side. And between the pipes, you want to talk about hot hands. Stolarz and Decord are doing great. Again, I said I think I give Team USA the edge on paper with the A teams, and we talked about that yesterday. With the B teams, it's still razor thin. I think I might go Canada just by a hair, though. It's still tight.
It's really tight. I would tend to agree with you, but here are some of the other players that Matt Larkin left off of his Team Canada B team. So if we're now considering C team, Kyrou, Byfield, Dylan Strome, Matt Duchene leading the Stars in scoring, Bo Horvat, Dylan Gunther, Ryan O'Reilly, Sean Monahan, Connor McMichael. On defense, Aaron Ekblad, Thomas Harley, Brandon Montour, Darnell Nurse, Chris Letang, Owen Power, Jacob Chikrin, Vince Dunn, Bowen Byram. I mean, if you're the U.S. team, leaving off the B team, Patrick Kane, Alex DeBrincat, Troy Terry, Kyle Palmieri, Matty Beniers, Nick Schmaltz. On the back end, it's even better. Brett Pesce, Ryan McDonough, Luke Hughes, Brady Shea, Lane Hudson, Ryan Lingern, Jacob Trouba, who we just talked about, Keandre Miller. I mean, in goal, Dustin Wolf, Calder Trophy candidate. Like, these are, really significant forces that you could put together 3 teams deep and have some really compelling arguments. It'd almost be the fun if that was one of the international exercises for All-Star one year. Is we're just going to build 3 teams for US, Canada, and we're going to have them all go head to head, and whoever wins.
All right. If you want to read the full piece, it's up at dailyfaceoff.com and have your vote. Who would win between the B teams in our Dominion Lending Center's poll question? Frank, we're going to get to our big segment and talk a little Blackhawks. But first, I want to get your thoughts on this. Luke Richardson gone after 2 full seasons in Chicago. The Hawks failed to win 30 games in either of those. And taking over is Anders Sorensen. He's been with Rockford since back in 2018-19. He's been their head coach for the last 3 seasons and then the handful of games this year as well. And he's the first Swedish-born coach in NHL history. A little bit of history being made here, I suppose.
Yeah, and also first European-born and trained coach in the NHL in like 24 years almost. It'll be on Saturday when he makes his debut. And so before we get to Charlie Roumeliotis, just wanted to quickly touch on Sorensen and what the Hawks' plan for him is. He's essentially going to get a really long audition here to see if he can be that full-time guy. I don't believe that they're going to, open up an external search while the season is going on. They would be free, of course, to talk to anyone over the meantime, but I think they want to get to the end of the season and see who becomes available to see if they have the full list of coaches at their disposal. That said, in Sorensen, they're big believers in his ability to really connect with some of the skilled and star players. Back in Sweden, he coached David Pasternak and also has been coaching the Nylander boys since they were little. So he's got a deep connection to them, and he can speak and think and talk the high skill game that I think is going to be so important to try and unlock Connor Bedard and get rid of some of that frustration that's crept into his game. Not that Luke Richardson didn't have the ability to relate to him or anything like that, but Luke Richardson is a 1,200 game NHL defenseman, a stay-at-home guy that played a tough, totally different game. Kevin Dean, one of their assistant coaches, one of the best defensive minds in the game. I don't know that they had done enough to this point to try and alleviate some of the frustration that had crept into Bedard's game. And so let's talk more about that now with Charlie Roumeliotis.
Yeah, let's get to today's edition of the All 32, brought to you by Fountain Tire. They treat your vehicle like it's their vehicle, whether you need a new tires or maybe your engine has a little rattle. Stop into Fountain Tire today and they will sort you out. Right now, you can save up to $225 on a set of 4 select tires, including Goodyear, up until December 14th, plus an extra $50 on any service of $150 or more. Some restrictions apply. Check out fountaintire.com. Excited to welcome in Charlie Roumeliotis from WGN Radio in Chicago. Charlie, thanks for popping on. And let's start with the Luke Richardson side of this. Back when he was hired, it was like, okay, they got this in terms of other head coaches, young guy coming in who's going to grow with the team and take them out of this rebuild. So where did everything go wrong?
Yeah, this is tough. I kind of wrestle with this decision by the Blackhawks because you think about Kyle Davidson's exit interviews from last year, basically saying, the last 3 years, we've been in the bottom 3 in the standings. And going into this year, the expectations were a little bit elevated, right? And so from that standpoint, you see through 26 games, the Blackhawks are dead last in the NHL. On the flip side, you look at the 26 games, and all except one of them, the Hawks have been leading, trailing by 1, or tied within the third period of every single one of those games. So they have been competitive from that standpoint. And this is kind of where I'll defend Luke Richardson from this standpoint. So the Blackhawks do this behind the scenes. It's called Every Shift. They've done it for 3 years in a row now. And the debut episode of this season, at the end of the episode, the coaches and the Blackhawks management, they're sitting in the room looking at a whiteboard at the opening night roster, projecting what the lines are going to be. And Blackhawks associate general manager Norm McIver is looking at the whiteboard, And he's looking, he's like, where are the goals going to come from? Because if we want to be better, we need a significant increase in our goal output. And so from that standpoint, before they even took the ice this season, the Hawks were concerned about where the offense was going to come from. And it feels like that's been a big reason why the Hawks haven't been able to get just that one extra goal. Because if they have gotten that, it would have kind of translated into more points this season.
Charlie, Kyle Davidson said this morning that he had kind of come upon this very recently and decided to make this change. What are some of the little things that you saw over the last few weeks that you think led him to that?
Yeah, it's a good question. I think you kind of look within the games of, in 8 of the last 9 games, the Blackhawks had scored the first goal of the hockey game. They've only won 2 of those games. And during a 3-game stretch there, I think it was the Philly, Dallas, and Minnesota, the Hawks went into the third period with a 2-0 lead, and they only came away with 2 points in those 3 games. And so you see the strides the Blackhawks have made, but within those decisions or within those games, the Hawks are probably looking at this like these are kind of correctable. There are a couple of things that jump out to me. The Luke Richardson, the handling of the Taylor Hall situation with the healthy scratch, I think was the most notable one that drew the most headlines. I think back to the Boston game, too, at the very end of the game, the Hawks ended up getting penalized for too many men on the ice penalty because they had 6 guys on the ice and Peter Mrazek hadn't left the net yet. So you just look at some of those little mistakes that if you kind of total all of them up, I think Luke is saying a lot of this or most of this is kind of fixable. So from that standpoint, I understand it from a Blackhawks perspective, but I just think Luke Richardson was in a real tough position. And so it's hard to kind of pin this all on him.
Yeah, there's no doubt this has been a tough road for him. I mean, for 2 years, his first 2 years behind the bench, he basically has a team in the tank and then finally gets a bit of a better roster that is expected to take a step forward, and he lasts a grand total of 26 games. That said, one of the big other things that I saw was the constant line shuffling, and I know that was by design to try and get everyone going, but it almost felt like, just, hey, let's shake the magic 8 ball today and see what comes out, and that's what we're going to end up using. In terms of Connor Bedard and the regression that we've seen in his game so far to this season, not just from a points perspective, but also, watching his body language and frustration, that has to be a big part of this. When you think to solving for that and trying to find a solution, what do you think, task number 1 is for Anders Sorensen to get that going?
Yeah, it's a good point. I do think it's trying to find consistent line mates for Connor Bedard. And I actually think Anders Sorensen, while he isn't kind of a household name in the hockey community, he does have that developmental background. He started his first 5 years here in Chicago as a development coach, and you've seen some of the work that he's done with Alex Vlasic and Frank Nazar, and Landon Slaggert's having a great year. Even Lucas Reichel, when he was in Rockford, had a really solid season under Sorensen. So you wonder if Anders can just kind of not come into this situation and think like he has to get the most out of the group. If he can just kind of unlock Connor Bedard and make sure that he's back on the proper development path, I think that's the most important priority for Anders Sorensen. And then I think it's kind of going to be a trickle-down effect that if you unlock Connor, it's going to translate into more confidence for him, more confidence in the team, and open up some scoring for Chicago.
We're already here into year 2 of Connor Bedard, and you're just talking about some of the struggles here in his sophomore season. But making this coaching change, is it maybe a sign, and as we kind of go big picture, is the organization further away than they thought they were? Is this a signal of that, or do you think they still view themselves as being on track in the Connor Bedard era?
I think the Blackhawks winning the lottery of Connor Bedard I think fans wanted this to be a quick process after that happened. And the difference between when the Blackhawks won the Kane lottery and they had Jonathan Taves is those guys were stepping into a perfect infrastructure already, where there was Patrick Sharp, Duncan Keith, Brent Seabrook. They signed Marian Hossa the next year. So they were walking into an unbelievable situation. With Connor, it's almost like that was the first part of the rebuild, but they still have so many first-round picks after that none of those guys were going to sniff the NHL right away. And even Oliver Moore, a guy they took in Connor's draft class, is still in college. So he hasn't even made the jump over to the pros yet. And so I don't think this is the Blackhawks regressing in any way. I just think the Hawks just were hoping to see incremental progress in the standings, and they haven't seen that. And to couple that with the fact that Connor Bedard is struggling, and they couldn't kind of roll back the same roster, I guess, or the same kind of feeling after the first 2 months of the season.
Charlie Roumeliotis from WGN Radio in Chicago. Appreciate you finding some time for us today.
Yeah, I'm a longtime viewer, first-time guest, so this is an honor for me to be here. So thanks, guys.
Won't be your last time. Thanks, Charlie.
All right, bye.
See Roumeliotis on Twitter if you want to find him there. Let's move along to our daily face-off inbox question brought to you by Charm Diamond Centers, proudly Canadian owned and operated since 1972. Check out their large selection of Canadian lab-grown diamonds, mine diamonds, and don't pay until next year with their instant in-store financing OAC. For more info, go to charmdiamondcenters.com. Frank, I got one here from the chat. I'm going to throw you away. I also want to spin it a little bit, but it's from Jay, and he says, if Trouba has this much interest, is there interest in Rasmus Ristolainen? And where I want to take this, could a Trouba deal be like a domino or a spark to the trade market, or is it just a unique situation?
I think it's a unique situation where the Rangers are essentially forcing this issue. And so, look, is there a market for Rasmus Ristolainen? Yes, there is. And I also think how he fares at the Four Nations face-off will go a long way in terms of determining some of that value. But I expect that he's probably going to be one of those guys that waits quite a bit longer until closer to the March 7 deadline.
Fair. Also, this one here to mix in some other sports. Mr. Mike, who's the longest tenured Chicago sports coach? Craig Counsell, 13 months. Yeah, the Bears fired their head coach a week ago as well. So a lot of turmoil in the Chicago.
Is that correct?
market.
I think the Bulls coach has been there longer than Craig Counsell. I think he's the second longest tenured.
Oh, yeah, that might be right. Well, I like trusting.
I couldn't name the Bulls coach to save my life, but look, I'm going to pull some random Chicago knowledge just straight out of my ass.
Well, you do that. I'll pull up the results from our Dominion Lending Center's poll question. Is your mortgage up for renewal? Lock in the best rates and products with Dominion Lending Centers. Visit dominionlending.ca. Frank, going over.
Billy Donovan, by the way, has been the coach since 2020.
There you go. So it's a little bit longer than 13 months, I guess. Poll over in the YouTube chat, or here it is on Twitter earlier today. 56% of people on our Twitter saying that Team USA's B team would or has the better roster. And what's actually interesting is over on the YouTube, where over 200 of you have voted on this show, it's basically the same, 54%. Frank, the people are with Team USA, not with me on Team Canada.
Yeah, and I would, even as a proud flag-waving American, I would probably lean toward Team Canada. It's, again, the fact that your potential third line is Lafreniere, Celebrini, Bedard is laughable. That's insane.
Yeah, it is crazy. Also, shout out to Mr. Mike, who is recognizing his mistake here with the upside-down smile.
Didn't mean to call you out.
All is forgiven. All right, Daily Bets brought to you by Bet365. Download the app, use the promo code NATION. Whatever the moment, it's never ordinary at Bet365. It's a Friday. I like taking a couple of favorites on a little money line parlay. Kraken played last night. Devils, I think, are playing really well right now. Minus 270 is a huge price. You got to play it with something. Columbus got the score was closer than the game looked against the Oilers last night, is what I'll say. So I like Vancouver to beat them as well on home ice. So minus 105 on the parlay there. And it's a Friday, so I want to do a little goal scorer parlay. Stefan Noesen up on the top line in New Jersey. He's getting power play time. He's having a great year. Marco Rossi playing with Kirill Kaprizov on the top line in mini. I think New Jersey will score a lot tonight. I think Minnesota will score a lot tonight. Over 10-1 on Noesen and Marco Rossi to both find the back of the net here on a Friday night.
Did you see the guy yesterday who had 5 different anytime goal scorers for the Florida Panthers in a parlay? It was $5 parlay and he turned it into $3,000.
Woo! That's a spicy one.
But
I like that.
Still 5 anytime goal scorers on the same team. Like anything short of a 5-goal game for your team, you're not winning that parlay. So good for him. By the way, pulling that game from the jaws of defeat, blowing the lead against the Flyers, then coming back and winning at 7-5, causing John Tortorella to skip his post-game press conference.
What? That's so unlike Torts. I can't believe that. Speaking of
Never
anytime,
misses a microphone.
Yeah. Let's get to garbage time today. Speaking of anytime goal scorers, how about Manitoba native Tyson Kozak in his NHL debut for the Buffalo Sabres last night? He scores, and then it gets waved off with his family in attendance, Frank. The images as they react to it are heartbreaking.
Yeah, that's a tough one. I mean, you look at that and it's like, oh man, I'm so close to my first NHL goal in my first game. Tyson Kozak from small town Manitoba. The best part about this story is that, as our friend Lance Lysowski was reporting at the Buffalo News, in Buffalo, there's the Marriott Hotel that connects over to the arena. And so he was coming down the elevator, going to the rink for morning skate, and he runs into his own family in the lobby. He didn't know that they were there. They were coming in by secret surprise for the trip. They knew he was making his NHL debut before he did. So the team didn't tell him yet. He's like, what are you guys doing here? And just kind of adds to a really special night. So congratulations to him on making his debut. Well done by the Sabres to bring everyone in town. And also the Sabres, another team to keep an eye on, as Kevin Adams addressed the media today. Not happy with the current state of affairs for his team.
There could be a lot of spicy headlines this weekend around the NHL. Also, Philip Broberg, Dylan Holloway make their returns to Edmonton after the offer sheet drama over the summer. So a lot going on this weekend. Another reason to keep it locked on Daily Faceoff. And as Frank leaves this show to go hunt down some Jacob Trouba news, a good reminder to hit that little notification button next to Frank so you get the news as it drops. Tremendous stuff this week from you, Frank, from Colby Cohn, who filled in for a couple of days, and Stephen Ellis. Our producer, Pat Puff, did a bang-up job. Everybody in the YouTube, awesome as always. Enjoy the weekend of hockey, and we'll be back on Monday at noon Eastern. What's up, hockey fans? If you enjoyed that video, then you're going to want to hit the subscribe button to not miss any of our content. From daily live shows with Frank Seravalli to analysis from former NHLers to exclusive interviews with some of the biggest names in the hockey world on Frankly Speaking, you're going to want to hit that subscribe button and stay up to date with everything going on in the hockey world.